In the flickering half-light of gas lamps that barely pierced the choking fog, the cities of the 19th century rose like colossal monuments to human ambition, their spires and smokestacks clawing at a sky already stained with the residue of unbridled industry. Yet beneath the roar of machinery and the ceaseless clatter of hooves on cobblestone, something far more fragile was beginning to fracture the very essence of human life itself. Urbanization had arrived not as a gentle evolution but as an unstoppable tide, swallowing villages whole and spitting out tenements crammed with the displaced. The air tasted of sulfur and damp rot, while the constant rumble of factories drowned out the rhythms that had once defined existence. No trumpets announced its coming. Instead, it slipped in through the cracks of economic necessity, promising liberation from the soil while quietly severing the bonds that had held families and communities together for millennia. The collapse did not begin with chaos. It began quietly, in the creak of overloaded wagons rolling toward the horizon and the distant glow of city lights that lured the desperate like false beacons. By the time the first waves of migrants crossed the thresholds of these swelling metropolises, the invisible machinery of rupture was already turning, reshaping not just landscapes but the soul of civilization in ways few could yet comprehend. Across the rolling hills and patchwork fields of pre-industrial Europe and beyond, daily life unfolded in a cadence as old as the seasons themselves, where the scent of freshly turned earth mingled with wood smoke from cottage hearths and the lowing of cattle marked the passage of dawn to dusk. Families worked the land in tight-knit rhythms, sharing meals under thatched roofs and gathering at village wells where gossip and wisdom flowed as freely as water. Children learned the land's secrets alongside their parents, their hands calloused but their spirits anchored in the soil that sustained them. Markets bustled with the chatter of neighbors trading surplus grain and hand-woven cloth, while festivals celebrated the harvest with dances beneath open skies unmarred by soot. This was human life in its most elemental form, tethered to the cycles of sun and rain, bound by mutual dependence rather than anonymous wage labor. The silence of night brought rest earned through honest toil, not the exhaustion of machines that never slept. Yet even in these seemingly timeless idols, the first tremors of change stirred unseen, as distant factories whispered promises of coin and comfort that would soon lure entire generations away from the fields that had cradled humanity since the dawn of agriculture. The early warning signs arrived not with fanfare, but in the subtle erosion of rural stability, where enclosure acts and shifting agricultural demands began fencing off commons that had fed communities for centuries. Smallholders watched their ancestral plots shrink or vanish, forcing decisions that felt like survival rather than surrender. Young men and women, hearing tales of city wages from returning travelers, packed their few belongings and joined the steady trickle toward urban centers, their eyes bright with hope while their elders shook their heads at the gathering clouds. Population surges, fueled by improved sanitation and crop yields in the countryside, only amplified the pressure. More mouths demanded more mouths to feed, yet the land could no longer stretch far enough. Factories beckoned with the clank of looms and the glow of forges, but the invisible warnings mounted rising rents in villages, failed harvests that left families hungry, and the slow hollowing out of once vibrant hamlets where empty cottages stood like silent accusations. Still, the migration continued, a quiet exodus that no one yet recognized as the prelude to systemic failure. The collapse did not announce itself in riots or proclamations. It began in these small, personal reckonings, in the moment a father kissed his children goodbye and stepped onto a road that would never lead home again. As the streams of migrants swelled into rivers, rising tension gripped the burgeoning cities where narrow streets overflowed with bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder in search of work. Factories loomed like cathedrals of iron and brick, their interiors a deafening symphony of whirring spindles and hissing steam that left workers' ears ringing long into the night. Wages barely covered the inflated cost of bread, and lodging in squalid boarding houses where disease spread as easily as rumor. The air grew thick with coal dust that coated lungs and turned daylight into perpetual twilight, while the rivers ran black with effluent from tanneries and mills. Families that had once shared a single hearth now splintered into cramped rooms shared by strangers, their routines dictated not by seasons, but by the factory bell that tolled without mercy. Children as young as 6 were lowered into the darkness of coal pits or chained to looms, their small hands nimble but their futures already dimmed. Social fabrics frayed under the weight of overcrowding, where theft and desperation replaced the trust of village life. Yet still the machines roared on, driven by the invisible hand of profit, and the tension coiled tighter, a spring wound by decisions made in distant boardrooms and parliamentary halls that no laborer could influence. Key decisions and mounting pressures converged in the unchecked embrace of laissez-faire policies that treated human labor as just another commodity to be exploited without restraint. Governments, enamored by the wealth pouring into industrial coffers, turned blind eyes to the mounting human cost, refusing regulations that might slow the engine of progress. Landlords crammed tenants into back-to-back housing blocks where sunlight rarely reached the ground floors and sanitation remained a luxury few could afford. Industrialists, chasing ever greater output, extended workdays to 16 hours while wages stagnated, ignoring the growing chorus of reformers who warned of impending breakdown. Economic panics rippled through the system like aftershocks, throwing thousands onto the streets when demand faltered. The pressure built in the form of bread riots and clandestine union meetings held in candlelit cellars where whispers of resistance met the heavy tread of constables. By the time these pressures became impossible to ignore, the urban machine had grown too vast, too entrenched, its gears greased by the very misery it produced. The collapse did not begin with overt rebellion. It began in these calculated oversights, in the quiet prioritization of output over lives that would prove irreversible. The moment the system began to fail arrived not in a single cataclysm, but in waves of epidemic and despair that exposed the fragility beneath the industrial facade. In the 1830s and 1840s, cholera swept through the tenements like an invisible reaper, thriving in the contaminated water supplies drawn from rivers choked with waste. Entire neighborhoods fell silent as bodies were carted away under cover of night, a stench of death mingling with the ever-present smoke. Factories slowed when too many workers lay fevered on their pallets, yet the demands of production never truly ceased. Families fractured under the strain, mothers burying children they could not afford to feed, fathers turning to gin to numb the ache of futility. The once promised prosperity revealed itself as illusion. Overcrowding bred not only disease but a profound alienation, where neighbors passed without recognition, and the human touch became a rarity amid the throng. Public outrage simmered into sporadic violence, but the underlying rupture ran deeper. The loss of agency, the erosion of dignity, the quiet realization that urban life had commodified existence itself. By the time physicians and reformers mapped the patterns of contagion, the system had already crossed a threshold from which retreat seemed impossible. Human consequences unfolded in the stark tableau of social breakdown, where the proud rhythms of rural life gave way to a grinding anonymity that hollowed out the spirit. Children orphaned by disease or overwork roamed the streets in ragged packs, their eyes reflecting a premature weariness that no village childhood had ever known. Women, once central to the hearth and harvest, now labored alongside men in suffocating mills, their bodies bent by machinery that cared nothing for frailty. Men, stripped of the autonomy of the plow, drowned their frustrations in alleyhouses that proliferated like weeds, their violence spilling into the alleys in drunken brawls that police could scarcely contain. Communities that had once mourned together now watched neighbors carted to paupers' graves without ceremony, the ties of kinship severed by the sheer scale of urban anonymity. Fear became a constant companion, the fear of eviction, of starvation, of the next outbreak, while hope withered into resignation. The collapse of human life was not measured in fallen empires but in these intimate disintegrations. The mother who no longer sang lullabies because exhaustion stole her voice. The father who no longer recognized his own reflection in the soot-blackened glass. Long-term historical impact rippled outward like cracks in a foundation too deep to repair, transforming entire societies in the image of the industrial city while sowing the seeds of future ruptures. The exodus from the countryside accelerated the mechanization of agriculture, further depopulating rural heartlands and concentrating power in urban elites, whose fortunes rested on the very misery they overlooked. Cities grew into metropolises that reshaped politics, economics, and culture, birthing new ideologies, born of desperation socialism, whispered in factory shadows, labor movements forged in the heat of strikes. Yet the human cost endured. Generations raised in tenements carried the scars of malnutrition and disconnection into the 20th century, where urbanization only intensified. The environmental toll mounted as well, with skies perpetually veiled and rivers rendered lifeless, a preview of planetary strain yet to come. Civilizations adapted, yes, but at the price of a profound shift in what it meant to be human, from rooted participant in the natural order to transient cog in an ever-expanding machine. The rupture proved irreversible, altering the trajectory of human settlement forever. In the end, the haunting legacy of urbanization lingers like the fog that once refused to lift from those 19th century streets, a reminder that progress exacted its toll, not in grand battles, but in the slow erosion of the human spirit. What began as a migration toward opportunity became the quiet dissolution of a way of life that had sustained our species through countless generations. The cities still stand, grander and more populous than ever, their skylines a testament to ingenuity and their underbellies a testament to cost. Yet beneath the neon and concrete, the same tensions simmer, overcrowding, alienation, the commodification of existence echoing the ruptures of the past. No one understood what was coming next when the first factory whistles sounded across the fields. By the time the signs became clear, it was already too late. The collapse of human life did not end with the industrial age. It merely changed form, leaving us to wonder whether the cities we built to escape the land have instead become the very cages from which escape may no longer be possible. The silence that follows the roar of progress is the most eloquent witness of all,